See, he didn't give me a warning last time. He just turned it on. Okay, cool. Hi again. If you weren't in the last one, hi for the first time. My name is Brady Gaster. I'm a senior program manager, and I work on the Docs Microsoft Com team. Actually do have some cool Docs things to show you during this session. The last one, I kind of had to infer some stuff and make loose connections, but I actually have Docs stuff I want to show you during this particular talk. You need to get in touch with me. There's two ways. This is the optimal way, Twitter. I encourage you to get in touch with me on Twitter. The second way is you can shoot me an email. I do want to let you know my specialties are obviously Docs, Microsoft Com, Azure tooling, VS Code, and things that are connected in there. There's a whole ecosystem of stuff. If you want to ask me questions about HoloLens, I know people I can introduce you to. My traditional numbers thing, I always have to tell this joke. First day you're at Microsoft, you learn a bunch of numbers. One of those numbers is how many emails get sent from one @Microsoft.com account to another @Microsoft.com account every day. That number is 25 million. I get about 45% of those emails. So if I don't get back to you right away, it's not that I don't like you, it's not that I don't know the answer, and not that I'm not finding somebody. I just have 40,000 other emails I have to get to. But I do pride myself on my community emails. So if you need something answered, just shoot me an email and I'll try to get you an answer. It might be one of those things where I kind of get somebody else involved, but I'll do what I can to help out. That font's annoyingly small. I apologize for that. PowerPoint was arguing with me. Here's what we're going to talk about today, and this is the last slide. It's really just an agenda slide because after this it's just tools, tools, tools. We're going to talk about the prerequisites, things you're going to need to install. We're going to talk a little bit about Visual Studio for the Mac. Then it's pretty much going to be CLI and VS Code from there on out. And we're going to talk about a lot of the different things that you can do in VS Code to party in the cloud, do things on Azure. This first one that I'm going to talk about, I want to go a little shallow into it, Visual Studio for the Mac, just because I haven't gotten too deep into it. I've been doing a lot of my work in VS Code, but I do like a lot of the great functionality that we've put into VS Code for the Mac. There's a limited amount of Azure stuff. Basically, the team had some difficult priorities they had to juggle. Azure was one of them, so they had other things they had to do. They're coming back around and they're adding more Azure tools in. I was actually in their Scrum room the other day, meeting with the guys, and they have a workflow. The Scrum room's probably a quarter the size of this room, and beginning on one wall, stretching around 3 walls, probably 10 by 10 rows and columns are pieces of paper with printouts of the screens. So they've actually got workflows of everything, and there's a picture online, Syed posted it, with Scott Hunter standing in front of those screens with this look on his face, which means Scott is probably figuring out if he wants it to be a dash bullet or a numbered list. Like, that's the level of detail that he goes into when he's looking at these things. So you will see more tools coming for Visual Studio for the Mac for Azure very soon. They're being very aggressive about it. It's a multi-team thing, multi-continent thing, but they'll get to it. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to dive in and kind of show you some of the tools. Now, I'm going to be taking a very tool-centric approach to this conversation. I used to work as a program manager in the VS team for Azure Tools, and like, I think about everything like tools should make your life easier. Okay, like, and I always want that to be the case. The first one that I'll show is kind of a sort of a file new project demo using and I'll use a lot of acronyms using VSM, Visual Studio for the Mac. What I'll do is I'll quickly do a new project here, and the idea behind this is I could build a brand new client application or a brand new ASP.NET Core application. I'll start with ASP.NET Core just for giggles. So I've got this guy right here. I can do an ASP.NET Core empty project and hit next, and I'll give it a name, simple.NET Core app. That'll work. I'll hit create, and what it's going to do, it's going to scaffold out a Visual Studio for Mac project, and then it's going to go up and it's going to download all the NuGets that I would need. And what this is really going to do is it's going to create a really basic plain Jane ASP.NET Core application. And really what I want to show here is not necessarily the ins and outs of this ASP.NET Core app. There's a lot of build talks you could look at If you've done ASP.NET Core, you already know everything I would say here anyway. ASP.NET Core is awesome. You know, runs faster. You've heard it all. Okay, but I'm not going to go through all that. What I'm going to show you is that you can actually, just like you can do in VS, in regular VS, you can actually right-click this guy, go here and say Publish, and then Publish to Azure. And the dialog comes up. I may have to log in, forgive me. But it'll come up, and you could literally do the entire, of course that would happen now. I'm not logged in. I'd have to log into it. Dang it. Account. This happened to me the other day too. My profile. No, that's right. Shoot. That's annoying. So what I could literally do here is I'll see here if it's going to do this. I'll try this. Sorry, everybody. I know you love watching people log in. I might be logged in as my other one over there. But the idea behind this is just like I can do in Visual Studio, I can actually directly right-click and do a Publish to Azure. It's going to let me create a new resource group if I want to. If I've already got a resource group I wanted to put the app into, I could select my resource group and push it up. It's just your basic wizard account. You just step through the process just like you would inside of regular VS. Of course, I'm not going to be able to show you now. I can say this. I can't go into too many details just because all I saw was what was on their whiteboard. But if you were to take a look at the publishing capability that you have in Visual Studio now, where you can create a SQL database and all that, and you can dial everything up and wire it all up together, they're going to be able to replicate all that in VSM very shortly. So all the same functionality that you've got in regular Visual Studio is going to be coming over to Visual Studio for the Mac. It's actually the same team that are working on it. So it's kind of exciting to see. Dang it. Having no such luck today logging in. I am connected, so that's good. I could probably try this again in a minute. I could build it out. Publish to Azure. Is this going to let me party yet? Check again. Check again. Oh, something's wrong. Yeah, I don't know why it's not letting me log in. I actually had this problem today. I think I've got a boned up install. But I will be completely transparent with you. These are the preview bits. Okay, so I haven't gone back and flattened my computer since it was released and put the updated bits on it, so I could have something kind of flaky. The one thing I will show you here that's kind of nice, if I do a new solution and I go in here and let's say I do iOS and I want to build an app, I could actually go in here and click Next, some iOS app, and I'm going to do this for Richard now that I've sat through the last talk. I want to go in here and actually build out an app for HTBox, for the humanitarian toolbox. What I really like is that what I've just done in here is I've created a plain Jane single page app that would run on an iOS device, and you'll see that what's popped up right here on the screen. Is my clicker going to work? Oh, it's not connected again. Dang it! You gave me a broken device. I really want to highlight it, but this area right here. If I wanted to, I could add an Azure mobile backend. I'm not logged in, so it's going to bark at me here. But what I could actually do at this point is I can take a look at my app service instances that I have, and if I have a mobile app that I've deployed up to, like let's say I build a Web API app, and I deploy that up to app service, I could actually see that in this list down here of my app services, and I could dial it in, and what it's going to do is it's going to download all the NuGets that I need for the mobile app client and everything that I would need, wire it up for me, do the auth and everything. You can see this bringing down all my NuGets at this point. But it gives me an easy way, if I've already got a mobile app backend, that I could actually dial that mobile app backend in directly using .NET Core client right here on the device. So that's kind of nice. And when I need to really walk through this. Like I said, I'm compelled to go work on an app for Richard now. But if I wanted to, I could go ahead and dial this in. I could have a SQL backend on top of my web app or my mobile app, and then it would literally give me connectivity directly inside of the VSM experience. Well, this is something that I reached out to the Visual Studio team. Of course, it doesn't see that I'm logged in. My apologies. But I reached out to the VSM team and I said, hey, not only do we have the mobile app capability in app service, but we also have the capability for you to do API apps. I'm a big fan of Swagger, or the Open API specification. V3 is what it's going to be called. What I want to see is for VSM to be able to interrogate and see all those Swagger islands, and then use something like AutoRest to generate code for me so that I could call my API directly. They said that's a great idea. We wanted to get to it. We couldn't get to it before build. That's the next thing we're working on. So they are definitely working in that direction. What I like is that I just went file new project, built an iOS app, and the first thing it does is it gives me the opportunity to log into my Azure account and party on it. So I think that's nice. It's that end-to-end experience is pretty good. If my login wasn't boned up, I could show it to you. But anybody tried VSM yet? Have you tried out VS for the Mac? You don't have a Mac? Okay. So, and yeah. It really is. Like they've brought all the same stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Especially if it's a .NET Core app, because you could actually, it supports all the SLN, CS project, everything is totally normal. It's exactly the same as it is on Windows. This is probably the last time I'm going to give this talk and it be on a Mac. The next time I give this talk is probably going to be something like non-Windows things. So, because a lot of the stuff that you're going to see me do from here on out for the rest of the talk would actually work on Linux as well. So the VS Code stuff, you can run that on a Linux distro. So this is the only thing I do that's really Mac specific. And as you can see, I haven't gotten too deep with it. Maybe if I get deep in this, I can do a whole talk on it. If you are interested in going a little bit deeper into the capabilities of VSM, not only for Azure, but across the board, Richard's conference circuit, Dev Intersections, they just had a Dev Intersections Florida, and one of the PMs on the VSM team gave a really great talk. And he walked through all the features of Visual Studio on a Mac. Didn't go too deeply into Azure. He was really more focused on kind of the client stuff, iOS apps. And I think his name is Jordan. So if you take a look at Jordan's talk at Dev Intersections Orlando, he goes pretty deep into it, and so there's a lot of cool features. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to dive in, we're going to get out of Visual Studio for the Mac, and we're going to start talking about the CLI, and we're also going to talk a little bit about some of the different tools that are wrapped around the CLI, and go kind of deep into the Visual Studio Code tools that exist for Azure. There's quite a few of them, one of which I just told Fanny about a little while ago. There's actually an IoT tool. So if I were to go out here, I just went to code.visualstudio.com and I clicked on Marketplace, or you can just go to marketplace.vs.com. I could actually go in here, and if I do a quick search for Azure, you'll see all the different Azure extensions will light up. So you've got the Azure Resource Manager tools, which I'll show you a little bit later today. My tools, the ATVSC. John Papa's got a couple of tools out here, the Azure Functions tools. They're really a nice collection of snippets and convenience features if you're using Azure Functions. So you can actually do things inside of Azure Functions. The one that Fanny probably should have known about before today is right here, the Azure IoT Toolkit. So you can actually use Visual Studio Code to reach out and connect to your devices up through the cloud, up through Azure. So I thought that was kind of nice. This has nothing to do with Azure. It's just a theme. So the next thing I'll kind of walk through real quickly is, you know, the best kind of tool is one that you don't have to install, right? Like that's the best, because you can just do it on the web. You don't have to worry too much about like, what do I download? How do I party on it? And like, if you wanted to create resources in Azure, you can go to the portal, or if you're like me, you'd use something like the command line. The nice thing is we've put that command line into the portal. So you could actually create brand new resources without using your mouse, totally do everything directly in what's called the Cloud Shell. And the nice thing about this Cloud Shell is I can tell you all about the architecture for this from a pretty high level, because we worked pretty closely with the team that built it. At the same time that the team, the ARM team, I'll say ARM, don't sue me, people that own the chip. Please don't, because it's just hard to say Azure Resource Manager. So the ARM team is actually responsible for this, and a guy named Brendan Burns is the guy who created Kubernetes, who is now actually came from Google. He's at Microsoft. He works on the ARM API team, and that team worked together and created this thing. So they've got this Cloud Shell, and what you can do is you can use the Azure CLI commands. So I could do like AZ log. I think I'm already logged in. Do AZ resources list, and this will actually pull down a list of all the Azure resources. Oh, of course I would do it that way. Resource, AZ resource list. There you go. And that's going to pull down a big JSON blob of all the different resources that I have. If I wanted to see it as a table, source list, I think it's just table. Is that it? No. Output table. There you go. So you can see all my resources now. So I can actually iterate and do all this stuff directly in the command line if I want to. And that's all well and good. It's great that you have this Cloud Shell right here. But what if you're just getting started with the AZ CLI? You're gonna do something like, you're gonna do a quick search to try to find documentation on the CLI. If you know the URL, you can just type in the URL. I'll show you what that is. docs.mscom/CLI/Azure. Now Brady, why did you make it CLI Azure instead of Azure CLI? Do you think that that's the only CLI Microsoft's ever going to release? Of course not. So we're going to have other CLIs like the function CLI. Eventually you might have the node CLI documented out here. And what's nice about this experience is that if you go out here, you can, let's say you want to create an app service. I could go right here and I could type in plans. If I want to create an app service plan, here's exactly how to do this. So we've got all the documentation, and just like the other reference documentation that you've heard me talk about before, this actually comes directly out of the AZ CLI's source code repository. So whenever one of their teammates does a commit or they accept a pull request from the community, we have a build that runs and rebuilds the documentation. So the AZ CLI documentation is as up to date as the source code for the AZ CLI because we're building on the fly. One thing you'll see here is that throughout this guy, we've got a copy button. We've also got a try it button on a couple of these guys. So if I click try it, look here. We actually open up this guy directly inside of the docs window. The one thing I don't like, and I've told the PM about it, and he says that there are reasons why it's this way, but the try it doesn't actually throw the text of that sample directly in here. I could explain why, but let me just ask you. Let's say you've got an open command line running in a web browser. Would you want people to be able to paste arbitrary code into it? Hell no. It's a massive security problem. Just having the CLI running inside of the browser is a pretty massive security consideration. But the guy who built it also built Kubernetes. So what do you think this thing's running in? A container. It's running in a container. If we see something go crazy, we just turn the container off. Okay. Not only that, but this isn't going against the Docs Microsoft Com Azure subscription. It's going against my subscription. If you were using it, it'd be going against your subscription. You're not going to write a loop in there that's going to create 1,500 VMs because you'll be doing it in your own subscription. See what I'm saying? So I just want to point out that we do have that capability directly in the docs. If you like the idea of clicking the try it button and the code that's right here just magically appears in the Cloud Shell, please feel free to send us a user voice comment because we're definitely trying to amplify that. So
there's no way of using someone else's subscription ID in here. It's completely.
It would be very difficult. Very, very difficult.
It's a full-fledged CLI.
It's a full-fledged CLI.
You can still go AZ login as a different.
Yep. Yep. Well, you could do AZ login in somebody else. Yeah, you could do that. I don't know about the one running in Docs or the one running in the portal. Now I know that you could do AZ login and log in with a token directly on your machine. All they've got is the AZ CLI. They actually deploy it as a Python package. You could use Python to install it, but they also deploy it as a Docker container. So what they've done is they've got this thing. They've got the AZ CLI containerized. So what they'll do is they'll create an instance of that container, then they'll bring down the image that has the AZ CLI on it, install that into that running instance, so you've only got that instance with the AZ CLI on it. So you could do all this, you could do that, but you'd have to log in. Now the way you do login in it is, I'll show you here in a minute, it does the device login. So it will bounce you out to the browser. So you'd have to log in manually in the browser, get the token, et cetera, et cetera. I could show you that experience now because the next thing we're going to talk about, we talked about the AZ CLI, but what I want to show you next is this fantastic tool that they released right around build time called the CLI Tools for VS Code. So what I'll do is I'll flip over here and you'll see that I have just a temp file open. I've got VS Code open. Now what I'll show you, I'll go to this extensions pane here, and if you look in the extensions pane in VS Code, you can see all the extensions that you currently have installed. If I click on one of these guys, you can see like the details about it, and if you wanted to go out to their site, you can just click on the name and it'll take you out here. Now this is actually something written by the VS Code team. You can kind of see what it does looking at their animated image file. I won't say the name, upset anybody. But what I'll do real quickly is I'll point out how you see this file extension, AZ CLI. What that does is it lights up that extension. So I can go in here and I could say, now remember how earlier I tried to type resources? That's not one of the commands. If I do AZ resource, it's going to give you the IntelliSense capability. So it's going to give you all this IntelliSense capability, resource, there you go. And then it will actually, this is cool, it will show you all the different things that you need to provide. The other thing it does that I like is it puts all the required properties at the beginning. So when you're looking at the IntelliSense, you'll notice that they're not alphabetical. They're not alphabetical because they're required and then optional arguments. So I really like that. Now I've already got one done. And what I will point out here is if you're in VS Code and you haven't yet installed either the Docker image containing the CLI or you haven't installed the CLI directly on your machine, when you try to run a command from within here, it's going to say, like, I can't run it. You don't have AZ on your path. And it will like pull down an information window, and when you click documentation, it will literally take you out to this site. Specifically, it will take you to this link. And what's great is all I had to do is copy this out and paste it into the terminal window, and I installed the CLI on the path. Everything was cool. I went back into VS Code, and I could now execute those commands, which is pretty nice. Now the way you would do this is you would select this guy, and I want to right click it so you can see I can run the line in the editor or I can run the line in the terminal. Now I always do terminal, the single quote. So what I would do is I would select this line and then I would do command or control single quote, and you'll see it's going to run that, and it says you need to go to this page and enter in this code. So I'll copy that code out and I'll hold down command or control. I'll click this link. I'll paste in the code, and now I would log in using whichever account I want. I've got 2 accounts logged in at the time. So I see that it's logged me in. I go back here, I let it breathe for a minute, and then it will say I'm logged in and I can start partying. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Like I can just directly, access everything here. Now what I'm going to do in this guy is I'll call this SDN demo. And I have to provide this to my other commands. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new resource. And the resource that I'm going to create, I'm first going to create a resource group. And I want to clear this out first. Clear this guy out. I'll select this line and I'll do command single quote. And what that's going to do is it's going to go out and create a brand new resource group for me. So I've just created a resource group up in Azure. Next thing I'll do, select this line, and this will create me a brand new SQL server up in my cloud. Once that SQL server has been created, I'll execute that next line. Oh, I can't make it that name. I'll call it this guy, Brady G1, Brady G1, Brady G1. I've already got that database created. So I have to do this. There you go. That'll go out and that'll create me a brand new SQL server, and then I would run the next line and that'll go out and create me a database. So I've already done this because the next demo that I'm going to walk through is going to be another set of tools directly in here related to SQL. So while that's executing, I do want to point out that I've already created a databases resource group, and I've got a database server and a database out here, and I've already configured this database to allow my client IP. I've actually set up a range coming from this building. So you could probably hack into the database. I'm just going to ask that you don't do that, at least not while I'm on stage. So the idea behind this is I want to actually execute some SQL commands against this now. Now, one thing that I really, really loved when I was in Visual Studio land were all the SQL tools. I'm a terrible SQL guy. There are 2 languages I never really got great at. One of them was SQL. The other was XSLT. I just never got really good at either one of those languages. So the tools were always very helpful to me to be able to write my queries and see what was going on live. Now that I'm on a Mac, I don't have that tool anymore. I mean, I can install Parallels and install Visual Studio into my Parallels instance, and then I could use the SQL tools for Visual Studio. But Lord, that seems like an awful lot of ceremony just to be able to execute SQL commands. So what I can do now is instead I could install this fancy little tool right here, MS SQL. Now, MS SQL is a Visual Studio Code extension that will give you the ability to connect up to a SQL Server database in the cloud. run commands against that database and be able to do things against it, which is kind of convenient. You'll see that I've been able to create that SQL Server, so now I'm going to do this guy and create my database. But I'm not going to be hitting that one. I'm going to be hitting one that I've already got. So just like you see here that I've got the colorization and the ability to be able to execute commands against the Azure CLI, because I've got the AZ CLI extension, I would have to create, you got it, a SQL file. And once I create a SQL file, of course, I'm going to get all the colorization. But what this also does is it lights up that MS SQL extension to know that it can actually execute queries for me. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just do Control-Shift or Command-Shift-P to open up this guy, to open up my command palette, and I'm going to type MS SQL. You'll see that I've got a couple different things that I can do. I can connect, disconnect, execute queries, yada, yada, yada. You can see down here that I'm disconnected. So at this point, I'm not connected to any of my SQL servers. If I were to click this guy, it doesn't have any connection profiles. I haven't created any of them. So I would actually have to create one. So at this point, I would need to be able to type in my database name, which I think is Brady G demo. Of course, I can't remember. Flip over here, Brady G demo DB. If I were to click this thing, get the whole name. I always forget the suffix. Anybody remember the suffix of the names? Is it database.windows.net or something like that? Find my, how do I get that? Basically what I want to do is get my connection string. Here we go. I'll go to this guy. There we go. Database.windows.net. Perfect. So I'll click this one more time. It's going to pop open this guy. I'm going to create a connection profile, paste in my database server, and it's Brady G demo DB. I'll hit enter. DB user SQL. Don't ever do this. Yes. I'm not gonna give it a name. I'm just gonna let it default to whatever its name is. You'll see now it's actually connecting. Profile created and connected. You see now it's telling me that I'm actually connected. So you can see that I've reached out and I've connected that SQL Server database, and I'm ready to go. One thing I do want to point out here, if I do Command-Shift-P and go to MS SQL, I want to show you this Manage Connection Profiles guy. If I open this up, if I click the Edit, you'll see where it puts them. It puts them directly into my settings.json file. So it creates an array of these guys directly in my profile. So this is not on, there's no way you're going to be able to commit this to a source code repository because it's deep in your user folder. So you don't have to worry too much about it. Now you could do something dangerous like create a workspace settings and copy and paste that into there. Obviously I would not advise that you do that, okay? Because then you're going to commit it and all hell breaks loose. So just want to point that out. But I'm already connected. I don't need to worry too much about that. I'm going to clear my terminal. And you can see that this time when I executed the command, I opted for table, and it doesn't really format well in the VS terminal, the VS Code terminal. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this guy. Now the first thing I'll do is I'll just select this, and I'll do Control-Shift, I think it's Control-Shift-E. You'll see that it's going to go out, and it's going to say, does this guy exist? No, it does not exist. I'll go ahead and do this one. What that's going to do is it's going to go out and create my table. Now I'm going to do a quick insert here. Go ahead and insert some records, and then I will do one more query against it, and you should see all my favorite. You can see how many I've got. If I do this last one, you'll see my data. So at this point, I've actually gone out, created a couple records in a database, and queried that database table and been able to report everything out directly inside of the app. The reason we can do all this is VS Code is effectively nothing more than an Electron app. So they've, just imagine the difficulty of this. They've created HTML that will render this on the screen. Like, that's patience, okay? And the MS SQL extension is actually open source. You can go out and you can see how they've done everything. It's pretty cool. But if I were to select the whole file and just do Control-Shift-E, you see that I'm going to delete the table every time and recreate it again. This also shows you when I'm coding. I'm coding during late night television. So if you see any errors, it's probably because I'm coding at 2 in the morning. So I just want to stress that. I'm going to back all these out so I can do this later on. like to save my files where they are. So any questions so far? Like I've used that Azure CLI Tools, and then we've used the SQL tools to be able to execute stuff. The SQL tools aren't just for Azure. If you've got SQL running on-prem, you could use this for that too. I was? Okay, cool, yeah. So it's not just for Azure, it's just for SQL. So.
Question is, let's say you're using SQL for Azure and you have blocked IPs, so it's that range you were talking about.
Yep.
Can you unblock that range from within VS Code like you can within Visual Studio?
You could if you, I don't know, let's look at the docs real quick.
It pops up a message saying if you're logged in.
It does. Yeah. Exactly. That would be good. Now, if I go here to server, oh, looky here. Create. So if I have the AZ CLI tools installed and I have the MS SQL tools installed, I could use the IntelliSense features that I got from AZ CLI to execute an AZ CLI command to set the firewall rules. Does that make sense? So you could do that all from within there, but you're not going to be able to do it using the MS SQL tools, which you kind of wouldn't want to. Does that make sense? Like, you wouldn't want to use the tool to access your database to set the firewall settings, because then everybody can do it. You know, that wouldn't be good. Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of, yeah, exactly. It's kind of a bad move. And I have seen that too. I've seen a database table of connection strings, and I quit. Like I was like, I don't want to work here anymore. It wasn't at Microsoft, how much I can say. So that's kind of the deal with the way all of this stuff works. Now the next thing I'm going to show you is a series of tools that I have written. Obviously I'm partial to them. I'm getting to them in the most boring way possible. Go to my extensions tab and you'll see that we have this wonderful tool here called the ATVSC. You can see the publisher name is my name. It's because I started working on this. Honestly, the reason I started working on it is I knew that we had the Node SDK documentation coming to docs.microsoft.com, and the only documentation that I had up to that point was the GitHub IO site. I knew that I'd wanted to write a VS Code extension using the Node SDK, but I didn't know the Node SDK. I barely knew Node. I didn't know anything about VS Code extension work, and the only thing I had was reference documentation. So I went out and I used that reference documentation to sort of think about it from the perspective of a customer. When I bring the Node SDK documentation to docs.microsoft.com, I'm going to want it to be something I wish I'd had when I was writing this extension. So that's honestly the etymology of how I started building this tool. Almost a year later, I've got about 4 different guys all over the world, most of whom are in Microsoft submitting contributions. And our telemetry looks pretty good. We've got 15,000 downloads, 16,000 downloads. So it's been fun to build. But what I want to do is I'm going to show you some of the cool features of it. And you go on when? 3:15? 3:15? What? 3:30? Okay, that's fine. So what I'll do is I've got this installed already. If you want to install it, you just look for Azure Tools for VS Code. So I'm going to do Control-Shift-P, and I'll show you all the commands that are available here. Just to walk through some of these commands, just to explain sort of what they are. You'll see the word create quite a bit. What we were doing, when I say we, I'm kind of talking of a virtual team. There's a guy in Ireland, 2 guys in the UK. I'm going to get you to submit some PRs eventually. So, but what we're doing is, as we use features of Azure, we want to add support for the things that we do in Azure on a regular basis to our tools. Okay, I think that I wanted to demo today was we've got a preliminary PR on the way for adding support for Azure Container Services. So if you do anything in Docker, you'll be able to use our tool to create an instance and upload your Docker container using the Docker tools. But just to kind of walk through some of the features, the 2 at the top are browse. I'm going to give you the ability to browse any of your Azure resources in the portal directly from within VS Code. Give you the ability to get to a resource group. In terms of provisioning or creating, we've given you key vault storage, 2 different ways to do web apps and function apps, a batch account, and then we've got some support for ARM templates, which is some of the stuff that I'm going to show you today. What we've also done is we've taken a dependency on the ARM editor tools, which give you IntelliSense capability and colorization. So if you're writing these really complicated ARM templates using JSON language, you get the help of that tool for free. What I wanted to do was to take their tool and use that as the way to make the editing experience better, but then write in the ability for us to publish those templates up to Azure. So I'll show you kind of how all that works. So the first thing I got to do is log in. One thing that we are also doing is we're talking to one of the PMs on one of the teams who writes an NPM package called AZ Login. AZ Login is used by a couple of other VS Code extensions. We're not using it yet. What we want to do is create a VS Code extension that sits on top of that NPM package so that we have one way of logging into Azure so that all the extensions can do it the same way. So you saw when I logged in using AZ CLI, it puts up the command at the bottom and I have to actually click it. Here's what we do. We actually take that code, copy it into the clipboard for you, and then you click sign in, and it just bounces you out, and then you paste it in, and you get the code, and you're logged in. So now I'm already logged in. And then when I go back over to VS Code, it's going to pop up in a message that says, we have successfully logged you in. So it just kind of lets me know. Just quick show of hands, how many of you prefer going down to the terminal window and clicking it versus the info window? Who prefers the terminal? Who prefers this way? Nice. I love you guys. See, I told you so. There's a current debate as to that. But what we're going to do is we're going to put that functionality in the AZ login extension so people can pick which way they want to do it. Give people the option. So the next thing I'll do is I'll type browse here. And the first thing I want to do is say browse in portal. What this will do is it'll actually go out and bring back a list of all the resources that I have up in Azure. So what I would do is I would look here for my blog site. I would click that, and that is going to just take me directly to that resources blade in the portal. The idea behind this is I don't want to go to the portal and go click, 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 click. I'm in VS Code all day long, so I'm going to use VS Code, find the thing I want, and bounce right out to the portal and be on it. At the same time, if I wanted to see a particular resource group, I could go browse. I could select a resource group. Let's say I want to see my databases, see if anybody's hacking into them yet. I would select my databases resource group, and I'm right out the portal blade for that particular resource group, and I can see everything I want. I saw you fumbling around earlier looking for one of your resources. I was like, just install the tools. You're good. So I do want to point out that we have that capability. That's also in the CLI. The CLI will give you the ability to bounce out to the portal as well. But you do it in VS Code. So there's all that. Half past. So the next thing I'll show you is I'll type web app here. You'll see that we have two different ways that I can build a web app. We've got the advanced method. We've got the simple method. The first one I'll do is the advanced method because I want to walk you through kind of what the options are. So I'll do advanced, and it says like, what do you want your web app name to be? I'll call this SDN demo 42, and I'll hit enter. And it's going to go out and it's going to check to see if I can use that web app. That web app name. I can. Now it's going to say, do you want to use an existing resource group or do you want to create a new one? Well, I want to create a new one. So I'll do this guy, create new SDN resources. There. And now it's going to go out and create that resource group for me. It's going to say, do you want to create a new hosting plan or do you want to use the existing one? I want to create a new one. I'll call it SDN plan. Now it's going to create the farm, and you'll see down here it's creating my farm for me. After it created a resource group, once it creates the farm, it's going to create the web app. It's going to put the web app into that farm, put it all into that resource group. And if I want to see the progress, I can click on the output window, and you can see everything is happening. You can kind of see all the different steps that are going through in the process. So there you go. So if I wanted to do this, I could do Control-Shift-P, browse, browse in portal. I could type SDN, filter my list, and I can go directly to my site. So in just a second, I've created the thing in VS Code. I'm browsing to the thing. I'm making configuration changes in the portal, all I want. So do you want to show you that? The next thing I'll show you is if I wanted to create a second guy in there, I could say web one more time. I'll do a function this time, function. I could create an Azure function. I'll do advanced, and I'll call this SDN function 23. And I was going to say, do you want to use an existing resource group? Totally. I'll put this in my SDN demo guy. Do I want to do a new farm? I want to use an existing farm. So that resource group doesn't have any farms in it. So I'm just letting you know I can't create it the way you asked me to. But the good thing is we're doing a lot of this validation directly on the fly for you so that you don't blow up whenever you try and do a deployment. All right, I'm going to clear this output. The next thing I'm going to show you real quick, let me go to my extensions palette and I'll click here on the Azure Resource Manager tools. Now this is an extension that my good buddy Brian Moore who works over in the dev team, developer division. He works on Visual Studio Azure Tools, and he's kind of dovetailed his team to do some of the stuff in VS Code as well, because they've got a great ARM tool editing experience. Now, the idea behind this extension is Azure Resource Manager templates are rather large. They're these huge JSON files with which you can do a lot of different things. And there's a lot of functions that you can call. There's a lot of templates that you can reuse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what they've done is they've given you IntelliSense and colorization capability in this extension, so that if you're in there editing complex ARM templates, this thing will make it a lot easier for you to do so. The other thing I'll show you is if I were to go to Azure Resource Manager, QuickStart templates, there's a GitHub repository out here that the ARM team has been working on for quite some time. And you can see the scroll bar over here. See how little it is? That's because this thing has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different ARM template scenarios. So there's one out here for a main stack that has app service plus a MongoDB plus everything that you would need to be able to build a brand new main app. There's stuff out here to create service bus stuff. Spinnaker, I have no clue what that is. Spinnaker templates. There's all kinds of VMs that you could create, all kinds of different web apps, tons and tons and tons of things. It's just basically templates that are pre-configured for you to be able to start partying in the cloud right away. So what I want to do is I could do one of two things. I could use my command line or my Git tools. I could clone this repository, and then I could walk through the results of that clone, find the template that I want, customize the template, forget not to commit it back and accidentally submit somebody a pull request with my configuration in it, have to undo that. It's just a nightmare. You don't want to go through all that. So what I've done is I've given you the capability to search this QuickStart repository directly from within VS Code. So the first thing I'll do is I'll go into here. I'll show you my workspace. Now what I'll do is Control-Shift-P, type ARM, and you'll say search the QuickStart gallery for a template that you might want to have. It's so weird to watch me in delay on this screen. So what I'll do here is I'll just type web. Let's do web app. That's going to go out to the GitHub and do a search on that repository and find every single instance of the phrase web app in any of the templates that happen to have it in there. Now what I want to do is I want to create a web app that has a GitHub repository as a backing store, because I might have code in a GitHub repository that I want to deploy. So I've gotten back a list of all the web app containing templates. I'll do a quick search in here for Git. I found the one that I want. I'll hit enter, and look what happens. I'm going to create a new folder called ARM templates. Eventually I need to change the name of that so I don't get sued. So I'm just creating a brand new ARM templates folder in my workspace. I'm creating a new subfolder inside of that guy with the name of that template, and then I'm downloading two files from the repository. One of them is the Azure deploy.json file, which is my entire template. The other is my parameters. So what I'll do is I'll just walk you through kind of what this template looks like. Basically, a template just has a couple of different keys in it that I'm going to want to use whenever I do a deployment. One of them is going to be the name of my site. That's a string. Another one is my hosting plan name. One is SKU. Now, I know what these SKUs mean. F1 is free, S1 is standard. So I know that the first thing that I want to change in my parameters file is going to be the SKU. So I go over here in my parameters file. I can type in SKU. I always do that. Type sky. Do this guy, and then I'll say value. And see, now I'm getting that IntelliSense from the ARM tool editor. And I'll just do F1 here. I want to create a free site. Now, if I were to scroll down a little bit lower, what you'll see is this repo URL parameter. Now this guy is basically just a very simple MVC 5.2 app that Dave Ebbo, one of the guys who works on Kudu and App Service, that he created. I don't need to change that because I don't really want to go too deep and show you anything crazy here. I could also customize the branch if I wanted to. I'll leave that at master. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and take Dave's sample site. So I'm going to have to configure two things. One of them is going to be the name of my site. One of them is going to be my hosting plan that I want to put it in. And we'll call this Evo Demo 42 SDN. And this guy I would just call SDN Plan 10. Go ahead and save this. And now I can do Command-Shift-P, type ARM one more time, and then you'll see deploy the Azure Resource Manager template that's currently in my workspace. I'll select that, and you'll see that I've only got one. If I had more, I could be able to select. I'll select this guy. Now it says, do you want to create a new resource group? Yeah, I'll go ahead and create a new one. I'll call this guy ARM demo resources, and I'll hit enter. And now what it's going to do is it's going to take a peek at that ARM template. It's going to start deploying everything in that ARM template. Now the deployment won't be complete once it creates my resources, because what it knows is that this web app is backed by a GitHub repository. So what will happen is it'll go out, it'll create my plan. If I had asked for a new resource group, it would create the resource group, the plan, and then the web app. Then it's going to say, oh, well, he's got a GitHub repository configured as his backing store. So I'm going to go out and start pulling code from that GitHub repository and deploying that code directly into my web app. It does all that on the fly. So this deployment will take a couple of seconds because it's actually going to pull all that code over from GitHub for me and do like the full-on VS build and deploy stuff. But it's nice because I didn't have to go to the portal and do this. I didn't have to open up VS. I know that I've got code in GitHub. I can just party on it. I did this demo for the virtual meetup on Google Hangouts, and I actually deployed my blogging tool called Downer, and that was funny because I had not tried that demo. That was totally off the cusp, and it worked. Couldn't believe it. It's crazy. Now Downer does take a little while for it to build and deploy, so we won't do that one today. But you get the idea. It was kind of deploying everything directly from here. Now imagine if you went into VS Code and you wanted to create a Linux VM and do some customization in your template. You could do all that directly in here. You could just pull it all down and party on it. I'm trying to think if there's any other demos I wanted to show you of my stuff. Don't think there are. Go ahead.
Azure CLI, can you only execute one line at a time, or can you highlight all and say execute all?
I haven't tried yet. I honestly haven't tried. Try it out. One thing that, oh, so you see it's already deployed it. So that's kind of cool. Now what did I call it? EBO. So I can do Control-Shift-P, browse, browse in Portal, EBO. This is the brand new EBO site that we just created. If I click on this guy, you can see that I'll go right out to the portal blade for that particular resource. And if I, see I'm out here, browse, click browse. You'll see that the site will pop right up. While that's rendering, what I'll do is I'll go over here to deployment options, and you'll see that it's already wired up to GitHub and it's already done a deployment. And then there it is. It's just your traditional like ASP.NET app right out of the box. So that's all wired up and ready to go. The other thing I'll show you real quick, one more thing, is like, let's say you've gone through the process of creating a pretty complex topology in Azure that has, I can't wait for you to figure out if this works or not. I'm kind of curious. Let's say you've created a couple of VMs, a function app, a storage account, yada, 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 and now you need to replicate that in a staging environment because you built everything in production because you're lucky. You know what I mean? You always build in production and everything works because you're magic. And now you want to do the right thing and back it off and have a staging environment so you can actually test your features first. What you can do is you can export an entire resource group as an ARM template. So I'll go ahead and do that. Now I do want to point out there's a couple of issues in the way this API works. And by this API, I don't mean VS Code. I mean the Azure API. Sometimes it won't pull down every little nook and cranny of all of your settings. And it will refer to that as an error because we want it to be 100%. So sometimes if you do this export, you'll see an error even though it will pull down everything. I'll just leave, which one do I want to pull down? I'll pull down databases. I'll pull down database. So you see it's going to export that template. It says that it's already done it. It's opened this guy up. It's already opened the file up. If I do Control-KD, there's the ARM template for everything that I just finished building. And if I were to scroll down, you can see my firewall rules. I saw them a minute ago. And I have the firewall rules set up. There you go. There we go. So this is me setting this up so that everybody in this building can get into that database. So that's actually the firewall rule that I set up earlier before I started the demo. So I do want to stress that we literally just exported a resource group down. If I wanted to like basically redeploy this out, I'd have to change the name because I've already got that database name. But I could totally deploy this into a totally different resource group and have multiple environments that I could use. I'll save it because I like the way it's formatted. Is there any other thing? Oh, let me show you one more thing. Anybody use a storage account ever for any purpose at all? So you know the connection strings are always a pain in the butt to get, right? So what I've done is I've given you this nice feature. If I do a search for storage account, you can create a storage account or you can get a storage account connection string. So let's say I've got an ASP.NET app that I want to allow to upload files, and I'll save those files as blobs in a storage account, but I got to get the connection string. I could either go out to the portal or I could use this feature. I'll go ahead and select this guy, and it sees that I only have one storage account in my subscription. I'll select that storage account. It's going to pull down the keys. It says that it's copied those keys to my clipboard. I could do File New. I could paste it in. There's my connection string for that storage account. So we've gone ahead and pulled down that connection string directly from the fabric. I could paste this into my web config and then deploy everything up. Or I could paste this in as a configuration option in an ARM template. When I deploy the ARM template, all the configuration will just go up with it. It's kind of convenient. That's about all I have. I think I'm almost out of time too, because you need your 15-minute break. I've shown you the ARM tools for VS Code. We've walked through just about all of it. And I'm done a couple minutes early, which like never happens. But all that said, does anybody have any other feature ideas you'd like to see? Anything else you'd like to see added eventually? Did you answer your own question?
Are there any variable support for Azure CLI?
I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Imagine you have tons of variables in the script. You can just define one and say, this is my resource group, and it will take it over.
I don't know. I mean, it would really be, I think the variables would be more a side effect of what OS you were on. Like if you're using Bash or PowerShell, your parameter structure is going to be different. I don't know if it has any built-in capability for that. I don't think so.
What I'm actually suggesting is that if Visual Studio can intercept variable and actually just duplicate it for you.
That'd be a good thing. That'd be a really good thing. We should talk about that. I don't work on that product, but we can talk about that and get the request over to Chris. See if Chris can build it in there. Any other questions? Anybody else? One thing we're trying to add, like I've already talked about, we want to create one way to log in to all Azure extensions inside of VS Code. That's something that may be done before I get home. We've got a couple of guys tinkering with that. And then the other one is the Kudu deployment. Does anybody know what Kudu is? Kudu is the deployment engine to app service. So when we did a deployment from GitHub or we do a deployment from Web Deploy, what you're actually hitting is the Kudu endpoint, and the Kudu endpoint knows how to deploy everything out. Kudu has a HTTP API that you can zip up a web project in a zip file, and you could throw that zip file to the Kudu API. It will unzip that zip file and then lay down the files in the web app for you. We're trying to work with one of the guys who's got another VS Code extension called AZJS. It's really kind of targeting the Node community. We're working with him because he's already implemented Kudu deployment capability in his extension, but I wanted it in mine. So what we're going to do is we're going to take his Kudu deployment functionality, take that out, make a totally different extension for it, and then my extension and his extension will just take a dependency on that one. So that's kind of the next thing we're doing. That way you could go in here, you could use something like Yeoman to create an ASP.NET or a Node app, edit your app in VS Code, use VS Code and the Azure Tools to provision your app service, and then you could just deploy it directly using the Kudu HTTP API. Or we could use containers, which is the next feature we want to add. But if anybody can think of any other features that you'd like to see in here, if you're doing anything in Azure and you use VS Code a lot, feel free to let us know. I'd love to have issues on the GitHub site for it. Show you where that is. You can get to it directly by installing. If you go out to the tool, close other tabs. Oh, of course, that would be the wrong one. I didn't even go to my stuff. This one, sorry. If you go out to the site, to the extension site, you can actually see the GitHub URL. And we have a couple of issues. Most of the issues are actually us tracking features that we want to add ourselves. But if you want to submit an issue, just come out here, go to the Issues tab, and send us an issue or send us a feature request, and we'll see what we can do to work it in. This is actually a totally fully open source project. This is something that we've done in our own time. Like I said, it's probably 4 or 5 contributors all over the world. All of us work for Microsoft, but none of us work on this product as a main line. We just do it for fun. So if you want to contribute, we'd love to have your contributions. And it's done in JavaScript, not TypeScript, so you don't have to learn another language. So eventually we're going to move it to TypeScript, but that's a little bit down the road. Thanks a lot. I hope you guys had fun. Cool. Awesome. You're next, huh?